The movie opens up with a woman named Harriet narrating that she works for a client who has been tasked with introducing salmon and salmon fishing to Yemen. The scene cuts to Dr. Alfred Jones, who is writing a letter to someone informing them that the mission to introduce salmon to Yemen is fundamentally impossible. Scenes cut between Harriet and Alfred. Their lives seem to be polar opposites. Harriet is in a relationship with a soldier named Captain Robert Mayers, while Alfred is married to a woman named Mary. Elsewhere, the press secretary to the British Prime Minister, Patricia, is woken up in the middle of the night as there has been an attack on an Afghan mosque. Patricia is on the phone with someone she works with and is adamant that the people of Afghanistan are informed that the British have nothing to do with it. The next morning, she has her entire team finding a news story from the Middle East that could divert attention from this. Patricia cycles through many possible stories, unimpressed by all the suggestions, until she gets a call from the Prime Minister, who informs her that she has something she may like. Later, Patricia gets on the phone to Mr. Bernard Sugden, who happens to be Alfred's boss. Patricia informs him that she would like him to get on with introducing salmon fishing to Yemen, as a wealthy sheikh who is a friend of the party wants it done. Bernard is unsure, however Patricia pressures him to get it done as soon as possible. Bernard meets with Alfred in his office, though Alfred is much too distracted to pay any attention to the idea of salmon in Yemen. Instead, he's trying to think of a cover for his new scientific paper. Alfred scoffs at the idea, however Bernard orders him to at least meet with Harriet, who is overseeing the project, and will not take no for an answer. Later that day, Alfred meets Harriet at her office, and is not the least bit friendly, as he's annoyed by the whole idea. Alfred very confidently points out that Yemen does not receive an adequate amount of rainfall for salmon to thrive. Though Harriet corrects him, Yemen gets 250 millimeters of rainfall in the wet season. She also points out that with a dam, you could recharge a habitat with fresh water in the dry season. Alfred tells her to get in touch again when the hypothetical dam is completed. Harriet stops him from leaving, informing him that the dam in question was completed several years ago. Now Alfred is rendered speechless. He continues his protests that he believes salmon cannot survive in such an environment, and Harriet replies that the sheikh who is funding the project is somewhat of a visionary. Alfred again reiterates that he believes the idea is ridiculous, and takes his leave and bumps into a glass door, much to Harriet's amusement. When Alfred arrives back at his office building, he goes to see Bernard, who hands him his P45. Alfred is confused as to why he's being fired, and Bernard explains that if he chooses not to go to Yemen, his employment is no longer required. While at an orchestra rehearsal with his wife Mary, Alfred reveals that he resigned, to which she states that Alfred cannot afford to resign. However, to Alfred, the decision to resign was due to upholding the principles of the scientific community. Mary is not happy at all, snapping at Alfred, reminding him that they have a mortgage on their home. Mary and Alfred eventually leave in the pouring rain, and Alfred takes cover underneath his wife's umbrella. He tries to convince his wife that being unemployed may be good for them, even suggesting that they have a child, and he becomes a stay-at-home father while she works. It is clear that Mary doesn't think much of her husband, as she wears a general look of displeasure when around him. Meanwhile, Harriet is saying her goodbyes to her partner Robert, who is a captain in the British Army. Robert asks Harriet if she will wait for him, to which Harriet doesn't answer, and instead embraces him. The next day, Harriet has a meeting with Alfred, who is outlining the salmon-related project. Alfred still seems to not be on board, very much behaving like a man who has been forced to do this against his will. He ends up making some difficult demands of Harriet to try to make her abandon the project, such as stating that the costs will exceed $40 million, and that they will require 2 large Russian military aircraft. Alfred heads home to find that his wife is packing her things, and when he questions her on where she is headed, she answers that she is off to Geneva for 6 weeks. This shocks Alfred, as he had no idea that Mary was off to Geneva tomorrow, and for 6 weeks too. He stands in front of the pond in the garden, sulking that his wife made such a big decision without informing him. Mary comes and stands next to him, apologizing. He apologizes to her for not congratulating her instead, and then heads inside, looking for something fizzy to open in celebration of Mary getting this chance. Meanwhile, Patricia receives a notification on her phone, alerting her that the sheikh has transferred $50 million for the salmon fishing project. Sometime shortly after, Patricia goes to meet Bernard, who introduces her to Alfred. Patricia is keen for Alfred to start on the project as soon as possible, though Alfred continues to voice his concerns, just for Patricia to ignore them. Harriet and Alfred make their way to an estate in the Scottish Highlands, owned by Sheikh Muhammad. Sheikh Muhammad is very keen to meet Alfred, as he has followed his work for some time, which comes as a bit of a shock to Alfred. The two men head off to fish together, and as the two of them stand in the water with their rods, Sheikh Muhammad asks Alfred if he thinks he is mad. Before Alfred can answer no, Sheikh Muhammad replies that if he didn't, he would question his judgment. Just then, as the sheikh is monologuing about the British class system, Alfred alerts him to a fish biting on his line. That evening, Harriet and Alfred are invited to dinner with Sheikh Mohammed. Before they go in, Alfred is taken aback by how Harriet looks in her dress. Alfred says nothing, instead asking how Sheikh Mohammed knew his measurements, though Harriet informs him that she guessed them and informed the Sheikh's tailors. During dinner, Sheikh Mohammed and Alfred get into a debate on the relationship between religion and fishing. Alfred is asked if he is indeed strictly a man of facts and figures, and why he chooses to fish when he knows he has such a low chance of success. He emphasizes the fact he believes little in religion and faith, though Sheikh Mohammed doesn't believe so, as he reiterates his belief that fishing and religion are intertwined. Later, the three of them are sitting around the fire when the Sheikh asks Harriet why she seems so down. She tries to persuade him that isn't the case, though the Sheikh states that due to having many wives, he is fully aware whenever a woman isn't happy about something. Harriet admits that she's been feeling uneasy due to her boyfriend being stationed in Afghanistan. Alfred agrees that this is worrying indeed, before he confirms to the Sheikh that he is indeed married, and his wife is currently working in Geneva. The three of them retire to their rooms after Sheikh Mohammed asks Alfred to seriously consider the project, as he is aware that Alfred isn't fully on board with it yet. Harriet and Alfred make their way to their rooms, and Harriet asks Alfred if he's changed his mind about the project after meeting Sheikh Mohammed. Alfred confirms that he has, as he's had the best day he's had in a while. Some days pass, and Alfred is back in his office, while Bernard is getting an earful from a man who works for the Environment Agency, who is appalled at the idea of shipping 10,000 salmon from British waters to Yemen. Meanwhile, Alfred is surprised to see that Harriet has arrived to see him. She looks panicked, so Alfred asks if anything is wrong, and Harriet informs him that the engineers who designed the Three Gorges Dam in China have come to meet with him. The meeting ends up going smoothly, with Harriet's help, who serves as Alfred's translator. After the meeting, the pair rejoice at their success and bump into Bernard, who looks at Harriet with intrigue. Bernard ends up asking Harriet if she would join him for lunch in the canteen, though Alfred pushes her along. Alfred and Harriet make their way to a restaurant near the River Thames. The two of them toast to the project, but just then, Harriet receives a call from the army barracks. She is shocked by what she is being told. She runs out, and Alfred finds her crouching with her head against the wall. He questions her whether she is all right, and Harriet reveals that Robert is believed to be missing in action. Over the next few days, Harriet stays at home, sick with worry over Robert's disappearance, not able to do anything besides wait on the phone to hear some news about her missing partner. Alfred ends up calling her, but she doesn't answer, so he leaves her a message. Some time later, Alfred ends up visiting Harriet at her home, though she is confused as to why he has chosen to do so. Harriet allows him to come in, but ends up taking out her frustrations on him, as she mistakenly believes that he has come to inform her about the progress of the project, which she currently has no interest in. However, Alfred explains that he hasn't come to see her in regards to work. Rather, he has come to deliver a sandwich and a bottle of wine to make sure she's eating. Harriet apologizes, breaks down in tears, and hugs Alfred. That evening, the two of them drink wine, and Alfred tries to reassure her that Robert missing in action does not mean he is not alive. He then asks Harriet to come to Yemen with him to see the project through, as they're due to leave tomorrow. Harriet declines, stating that she needs to be at home in case there's an update on Robert, which Alfred understands, but again informs her that he has asked Sheikh Mohammed to fly Harriet back on his private jet if there is any news. Harriet is shocked that Alfred would go so far for her, and he admits that it wouldn't feel right if he were to see this project to completion without her. Harriet ends up listening to Alfred and venturing off to Yemen to finish the project she started. Once they arrive, the two of them are taken aback by how different Yemen is compared to the UK. The two of them make their way to meet Sheikh Mohammed, riding in the back of a pickup truck. Once they arrive, they are shocked to see that the Sheikh is arguing with a man who is armed with an assault rifle, as are the rest of his men. Alfred and Harriet are confused by the commotion, but as soon as Sheikh Mohammed stops them, he ends the conversation and walks over to the pair to apologize. The trio end up enjoying their first day working together in Yemen, and one of the Sheikh's workers captures key moments of the day on his camera. Meanwhile, back in London, Bernard is struggling to come up with the salmon. Tom, Bernard's contact at the Environmental Agency, refuses to budge on the matter, and is adamant that getting the fish they need for the project is next to impossible. However, Bernard refuses to back down, even going as far as threatening Tom by stating his orders come from the very top. Tom eventually gives in to Bernard's threats, pretending to see this as an opportunity. In Yemen, Harriet and Alfred are staying in large tents at a campsite. One morning, Alfred finds Harriet on her phone, leaving a message for Robert. Harriet realizes this and apologizes, stating that she is well aware that Robert doesn't have his phone, yet she still chooses to leave a message for him, as she notes that she's turning into a mad woman. Alfred stops her, saying that he doesn't at all think of it as madness, as he himself goes to talk to his fish in his garden's pond when things get difficult in his life. He opens up to Harriet about his own struggles, especially with his marriage. He promises there is hope, not only for himself, but for Harriet too. Elsewhere, a group of Yemeni men armed with assault rifles are conversing with one another while reading a newspaper. The eldest, and presumably their leader, slams the newspaper, which has Sheikh Muhammad's picture on it, onto the ground in front of one of his men. The leader of the group then states that Sheikh Muhammad, whom he brands a traitor, had his chance, and now they must get rid of him. Back in the United Kingdom, Patricia is on the phone with the Prime Minister as she watches the news about fishermen, outraged that the government has decided to remove thousands of salmon from British waters and transport them to Yemen. She ends up opening her fridge and drops some salmon, as she explains to the Prime Minister that she will acquire the salmon from somewhere else. Patricia takes a trip up to the Sheikh's Scottish estate, where she also meets up with Alfred and Harriet, who have made it back from Yemen. During lunch, she explains that it will not be possible to acquire fish from British waters, though she has a solution. However, her idea involves acquiring salmon from fish farms, and both Alfred and Sheikh Muhammad note that this will not work, as these fish will not run, but instead just float downstream, never to be seen again. Sheikh Muhammad ends up declining Patricia's offer, and Alfred, as a result, resigns from his job. Sometime shortly after, the Sheikh and Alfred fish together at his Scottish estate. The Sheikh voices his disappointment with the project falling through as Harriet watches the two from afar. Just then, the same Yemeni man pulls out a gun and aims it at Sheikh Muhammad, who freezes in shock. However, Alfred is quick to disarm the man with his fishing rod, as the Sheikh's security team apprehends the man. Later that evening, Harriet is stunned in silence as she watches a news report that confirms that the British Army suffered heavy losses as a result of a recent attack. Alfred comes into the room and hears the MP on the television confirm that there were no survivors, all but confirming Robert's fate. Harriet goes to her room, where she sits on the bed and sobs as Alfred comes in to comfort her. The two of them end up falling asleep in the same room that night, though Alfred immediately takes his leave the next morning. Alfred ends up going back home, where is surprised to see Mary back from Geneva earlier than expected. Mary is delighted to see Alfred, stating that she came back earlier to surprise him. She then asks Alfred why he isn't wearing a suit and tie, and Alfred informs her that he has decided to retire after the government pulled out of the salmon fishing project. The smile on Mary's face quickly disappears, immediately voicing her annoyance at Alfred quitting his job. Mary accuses Alfred of leaving his job for Harriet, whom she insultingly refers to as a short-skirted office girl, even though Alfred states that he is still being paid. Alfred takes offense to Mary insulting Harriet, and is adamant that she is just a colleague. Alfred storms off, leaving Mary in the kitchen, gobsmacked. He stands outside, feeding the koi fish in his pond. Mary comes outside and stands beside her husband at the pond, calmly asking him if he is in love with Harriet. Alfred just simply apologizes, all but confirming his feelings for Harriet, and Mary is furious. She states that he'll crawl back to her one day, but then it'll be too late, and they break up the next day. Not long after, Alfred makes his way back to Sheikh Muhammad's Scottish estate, where he meets with Harriet, stating that he now believes that farm salmon may end up working. Sheikh Muhammad comes out to meet him, and Alfred relays his plan. The Sheikh simply responds by asking if he has faith in this plan, and Alfred realizes that the Sheikh was right when he said that fishing is all about faith. The fish are finally transported to Yemen, and Alfred is delighted to confirm that they are alive upon arrival. Meanwhile, Patricia receives a phone call informing her that one of the soldiers who was earlier presumed fallen has been found alive, Robert Mayers. Patricia requests a total press embargo on the matter, as she likely doesn't want Harriet distracted by the news while she's working on the project in Yemen. Back in Yemen, Harriet, Alfred, and Sheikh Muhammad stand on a cliff overlooking the dam, proud of the work they've done. Later that night, Harriet and Alfred go for a late-night swim under the moonlight. Harriet states that she believes that this project saved her, considering everything that has occurred. Alfred opens up to Harriet about what Mary said to him before they split, that she was confident that he would come crawling back. He then walks over to Harriet and asks her thoughts on the two of them, if there is any possibility of them being together. She doesn't hesitate much, as she has known the answer to that question for some time. Harriet leans towards him and kisses him on the cheek, thanking him as she does so. The next day, the UK Foreign Secretary arrives in Yemen with Patricia. As the Foreign Secretary speaks to Sheikh Muhammad, Harriet and Alfred are sat by the water together, where Alfred shows her the new fly he has named after her. Harriet states that she thinks it's beautiful, and Alfred agrees that she is, seemingly referring to Harriet herself. Just then, Patricia steps out of her tent as she watches a helicopter land near the campsite. Robert steps out of the helicopter and walks towards Harriet. She sees her presumed lost-in-action boyfriend in the distance, and with tears in her eyes, embraces him, while Alfred watches, clenching the fly in his hand. Later, there is a press conference, which Harriet and Robert attend together with Patricia. The press are very eager to know the details of Robert's disappearance, though Patricia informs them that he will not be answering any questions regarding the military, as that information is classified. Meanwhile, Alfred watches from a distance, devastated that his relationship with Harriet may never come to fruition. Sheikh Muhammad approaches him and puts his hand on his shoulder, apologizing, as he is aware of Alfred's feelings for Harriet. During the evening, Harriet and Robert share a bed, and she notes how unusual it feels. She also suggests that she would like to hold off being intimate just yet, especially considering all that has happened. Robert is understanding and holds his girlfriend, and then comments on how ridiculous he thinks the whole salmon fishing project is. Meanwhile, Alfred is in his tent when he gets a text from Mary, who is pleading with him not to leave her. Alfred hesitates at first, but then sends his ex-wife his reply, apologizing and stating that ending their relationship is for the best. The next morning, Alfred is standing at the top of a hill overlooking the camp when Robert joins him. He thanks Alfred for treating Harriet well. However, Alfred simply replies that he loves her. At first, this doesn't register with Robert, as he likely brushes it off as Alfred meaning that he loves Harriet as a friend. Though Alfred reiterates that he loves Harriet, and this does catch Robert's attention, who is initially speechless, before asking him if Harriet loves him. Alfred only states that yesterday, they believed he was gone. The time to open the riverbed to fishing has finally come, and Sheikh Muhammad gives a speech beforehand on how he wants to use this project to increase agriculture for his people for generations to come. Meanwhile, Patricia reiterates to the foreign secretary that he will be fishing for the cameras later, alongside Robert, as it would make a great news headline. Alfred and Harriet are standing together when the river is opened, and Alfred is concerned when the fish all start heading downstream. Sheikh Muhammad watches on, rosary beads in hand, praying the project is a success. Suddenly, Alfred realizes that some of the fish have turned in the opposite direction, and he and Harriet are overjoyed at the project being a success. In the joy of the moment, Harriet hugs Alfred, and Robert watches her from afar. The scene cuts to armed men who have infiltrated the dam, and end up taking out some of Sheikh Muhammad's men. Their objective is to flood the dam, and to achieve that, they open up some of the pipes that release water into the riverbed. The Sheikh and Alfred are wishing together in the river, and just when Sheikh Muhammad catches something, a wall of water rushes towards them. Alfred, Sheikh Muhammad, Robert and the foreign secretary are all swept away by the incoming rush of water. Fortunately, all four of them manage to survive. However, the same cannot be said about the salmon, which are all swept away by the flood of water. They make it back to the camp. Sheikh Muhammad is devastated by the news that some of his people lost their lives. Alfred and Harriet are also heartbroken. All their hard work and effort have gone to waste. Later that night, Harriet converses with Sheikh Muhammad, asking if he will seek to punish those responsible. The Sheikh, though, isn't too keen to do so, as he states that he may have asked for too much. Harriet asks if he plans to ever try again with the project, and the Sheikh states that he would like both Harriet and Alfred on board if he decides to do so. However, Harriet looks disappointed as she replies that Robert wants to go home. Alfred, on the other hand, states that he no longer has a home, and that he's unsure of what he'll do next. The next day, Robert is ready to head off home, and Harriet stops him, claiming that she wishes to bid farewell to Alfred. Robert reveals that while he was lost in the desert, all that kept him going was the thought of getting back to her, though he promises that if she no longer feels the same, she doesn't owe him anything. Harriet walks up to Alfred and apologizes, saying she never meant to hurt him. Alfred assures her that it wasn't her fault, and that he doesn't intend to stay in Yemen, as he has no fish nor her to stay for. Just as Alfred walks away from her, Sheikh Muhammad stops him, pointing at the river, where a single salmon jumps out of the water. Alfred smiles through the pain, declaring that he'll stay in Yemen and make the project better and more sustainable than before, by involving the local community. Harriet is stunned, and then asks if he will require an assistant. Robert sees Harriet approaching Alfred and takes his leave, while Harriet and Alfred hold hands, as they look over what's left of the river they'll be working on. Patricia, meanwhile, messages the Prime Minister to inform him that the fishing project is back on course. The PM is delighted to hear this, though he isn't as happy to hear that the Foreign Secretary is alive and well.